Chef Anna Olson in her kitchen.
If you're looking to bake a romantic dessert that makes a lasting impression, well, you have to try my white chocolate mousse cake with mirror glaze. Oh, it is over the top. Beautiful on the outside, rich and creamy inside, and with a little surprise of raspberry jelly. But it starts with the cake. The base of this mousse cake is a chocolate cake, single layer. So you just whip the cake up by hand, and I'll start by sifting my dry ingredients. A cup of granulated sugar, then 3/4 of a cup of all-purpose flour, half a cup of Dutch processed cocoa powder, and a teaspoon of baking soda, half a teaspoon of baking powder, and half a teaspoon of salt.
She taps all of those into a bowl through her sieve.
And now for the liquids, I have half a cup of buttermilk,
Into a new bowl.
half a cup of hot coffee, a 1/4 cup of vegetable oil, a single egg, and a teaspoon of vanilla.
She now whisks those wet ingredients together.
I do love that this cake is easy to make, so I can focus my time and attention on making the mousse and especially the mirror glaze.
She now pours her wet ingredients into her dry.
First you whisk to combine, and then just by hand, you want to whisk a little more vigorously. Make sure there are no lumps.
She grabs 2 pans.
Now, I only need 1 cake layer for this recipe. The recipe makes 2, simply because cutting this recipe in half is just a silly small amount of cake batter. So I bake both off, and you can simply freeze one because I know you're going to be making this cake again. I've greased my 2 cake pans, and these are 8-inch cake pans. The sides are dusted with flour and the bottom's lined with parchment. The cakes take 30 minutes in a 350 oven.
She pops them in.
And that leaves me time to make the raspberry jelly. So this raspberry jelly layer is nestled right inside the white chocolate mousse cake. To make the jelly, the first thing I'll do is pour 3 tablespoons of cold water over a teaspoon and a half of gelatin, and just let that sit for a few minutes. I have half a cup of raspberry puree. So all I did was take some frozen raspberries, thaw them, puree them, and strain them to take out the seeds. I'll add that to my pot,
A saucepan on her stovetop.
along with 2/3 of a cup of sugar, and lastly, 3 tablespoons of honey. I'll heat this to dissolve the sugar and honey. So this raspberry jelly is not the kind you would spread on your toast, but is more of a set jelly, like a confection.
She stirs it.
It stays nice and tender, so when you cut through the white chocolate mousse, the jelly, and the cake, the consistency all matches.
The jelly has now come to a gentle boil.
There we go, just the sign of bubbles. So I'll take this off the heat, and in just that minute, my gelatin has softened, absorbing the water, and you add this all at once.
She stirs it in.
And you'll see it immediately turns glossy.
She smiles as she continues to stir.
And there we go. How easy is that, making jelly? Now, the trick is to get a beautiful shape. So you want to take a round bowl, no bigger than 8 inches across, that has a nice curve at the bottom. You lightly grease it and line it with plastic wrap. And then you pour the warm jelly in. And what I'll do is let this cool to room temperature, and then I'll freeze it. I work with the components, and essentially the cake is a whole frozen, even though it's not served frozen. I'll set that aside. Now it's time to make the white chocolate mousse. I have 3/4 of a cup of whipping cream that I'm going to bring up to a full simmer.
In a saucepan.
I have 10 ounces of white chocolate chopped up, and I'll add to that 1 tablespoon of gelatin powder that I've soaked in a 1/4 cup of cool water. So I just spoon the gelatin right on top of the chocolate. That way, when I pour over the hot cream does all the work.
And once the cream is heated,
Pour this over the chocolate, and I'll just let it sit for a second. You can do this in a blender or a food processor, or you can use an immersion blender if you wish.
which she is.
Now, just on a medium speed,
And later,
that 10 ounces of chocolate has managed to cool this mixture a little bit. But you want to cool it to just above room temperature, and that can take about 30 minutes.
in a new bowl.
Just let this set.
And later,
After 30 minutes, you'll notice that your cooled white chocolate base does thicken up a little bit. If you find this has set up too much, where it's not fluid at all, you can just remelt it and let it cool down again.
She taps her spatula clean on the rim of the bowl.
All right, now for the whipped cream. I've already whipped up 1 1/4 cups of whipping cream to a peak, and I'm gonna fold this in 2 additions.
She adds half and puts the rest down.
I like to use a whisk to really work it through the white chocolate quickly. Now, the cold cream is going to start setting up the white chocolate. So you wanna move quickly, and don't be afraid when you see it liquefy like this. This is part of the recipe. You actually want it to be pourable.
Now she adds the second half of the whipped cream and whisks that in.
And there we go. I've got my mousse nice and smooth.
She brings the cake over, now out of the pan.
Cooled cake.
But then grabs another pan.
And while I baked my cake in an 8-inch pan, I'm using a 9-inch springform pan to assemble the cake. And now for the raspberry jelly out of the freezer.
She grabs it.
The first thing to do is pour half of this white chocolate mousse into the pan.
She does, then tilts the pan to cover the bottom.
It should be fluid enough that you don't have to spread it, but just give it a swirl so that it coats the bottom perfectly. And then
She grabs the frozen jelly bowl.
this could be a little bit sticky, but just work with the jelly to take it out of the plastic wrap.
And once she has,
Drop this and press it gently into the mousse. The curve of the bowl is facing down now. You don't want to press the jelly down too far because you want that layer of white chocolate mousse at the bottom. Now I cover this with the remaining mousse.
this time she smooths it to the edges with her spatula.
And now my chocolate cake layer,
She tops the mousse with it.
it goes in upside down. And then I like to drop in my cardboard cake board now,
She presses it down.
so it all stays in place. Now I'll wrap this and then freeze it overnight. You want to give it a good 6 hours at least to freeze before you put on the mirror glaze, which is actually the best part of this cake.
Later, the cake now frozen.
The crowning glory of this romantic dessert is the white chocolate mirror glaze. So shiny, you could practically see your reflection in it. And it's kind of fun to make too. I have 12 ounces, yes. So this whole cake has 22 ounces of white chocolate in it. 12 ounces of chopped white chocolate. And I've softened 2 tablespoons plus 1 teaspoon of gelatin powder in 1/3 cup of cool water. So just like the mousse, I'm going to put the gelatin on top of the white chocolate. And to build on the shine, I have a combination of ingredients, starting with 2/3 cup of condensed milk.
She pours that into a saucepan.
So you get the sense, even just from the condensed milk, of the consistency of the glaze. It has this sort of shiny, syrupy character to it.
And to that she adds,
I have 3/4 cup of granulated sugar and 2/3 cup of water. I'll stir this together and bring it to a full boil and just let it cook for a minute.
Later.
Other than the bubbles breaking the surface, you won't see any change to this hot liquid.
she turns the heat off.
But after a minute, I'll pull it off the heat and pour it over my chocolate. Now, what's very important when you're making a mirror glaze is to try and avoid air bubbles. So when you use your immersion blender, you want to use it on low speed. That way you're not working any air into it, and try not lifting the immersion blender above the glaze itself.
And a few minutes later,
There we go. Now it's nice and smooth. What I need to do to help get rid of the air bubbles on the surface is strain it just slowly through a strainer into another container. As fine a strainer as you have.
she pours the white chocolate mixture through a sieve and into a new pitcher.
Because of the white chocolate, we've got a beautiful buttery color here. Now, if you wanted to tint your glaze, you can add white coloring to your
She
mirror
does.
glaze, and then that makes it take clean color as well.
She mixes it.
So now that I have the white blended into my glaze, I'm going to do 2 tones of pink
by dividing it
and keep some of this white glaze.
into several pitchers now.
The next step in this process is to wait. You need to cool your mirror glaze to between 80 and 86 Fahrenheit or 27 to 30 Celsius.
Later,
This is the moment we've been building towards. The glaze has cooled, so now it's time for the big pour. Now what I'll do is I'll pour my light pink into the white, slowly and carefully, not stirring. Then I finish with the darker color. So no matter how many colors you use, you always start lightest, go to darkest. Then I'll just simply pour it on top of my unwrapped frozen cake and watch it drip away. The colors blend as I swirl and swish. I start at the center and then spiral outward.
The excess from the top coats the sides of the cake, which is on a pedestal.
After the glaze has had a chance to set for about 10 minutes, then you can just run a palette knife to clear off these edges, put it on your presentation plate, and keep it chilled until it's time for that magic moment. Oh, the romance. And just think, for a chocolate lover, this is one decadent cake. 22 ounces of white chocolate, that raspberry jelly, the chocolate cake underneath. But really, it's all about the gesture of baking to share with those you love.